Welcome to The Reaction. I'm Sarah Vine, and here is Peter Hitchens standing in for Andrew Pearce.
Well,
how do you feel about that, Peter?
So far, so good.
So this week's big, exciting story is the King's speech, which we've just had. You watched it. Are you still alive? Do you need,
I got through it.
An injection of adrenaline?
I remain conscious, even though great waves of soupy jargon rolled over me, and I can, in fact, remember very little of the government's programme. I'm sure I should be reminded of
I have a list.
savagely over the next few months. But there were a couple of things which stuck in my mind. One of them was our hereditary monarch announcing the abolition of hereditary peers.
Right. That's interesting.
It is, isn't it? It's kind of paradoxical.
When is that going to happen?
Soon, I think. They're anxious to turf them out. They got rid of most of them, of course, under the Blair terror.
I was going to say there aren't very many left.
No, there aren't many left, but there are a few. There was a compromise worked, and they kept a few on.
Yeah.
One of whom, I believe, is a scion of the Ben family. But I think that this is the end, and it's a fascinating thing that they're so determined to get rid of them.
Well, this is the idealism, isn't there? This is Starmer's, because also in this King's speech is the end of VAT exemption on private school fees.
Oh, the spiteful attack on private schools which we've of course known about for ages, but it's interesting that they're so keen to do this thing, which will raise very little money and make almost no difference at all to state education, but which will make life incredibly difficult for so many of those people on the very edge of being able to afford independent education who now won't be able to. It won't hurt the rich, who won't care at all.
No, they'll just carry.
It's just a pure act of spite against independent education. And
well,
it gives you a very good indication of what kind of government this really is.
But particularly against sort of middle-class people, I think. Because, as you say, with the rich, we'll just have one less holiday in Gestad, and that'll be fine.
If that. I mean, it will pass them by. But we have to remember the great Nick Ferrari interview, one of the very few successful political interviews of the election campaign, in which he said to Keir Starmer, well, who do you mean by working people? Because he kept exempting working people from all the horrible things he was going to do, and he basically said people without savings. And that's it. I mean, obviously people without savings require to be looked after to some extent. There are an awful lot of people who have savings, have savings because they've worked very hard, and not because they're particularly rich. But they are, as far as Labour is concerned, they're outside the group of people who they're prepared to think about.
But people with savings are just people who are, trying to insulate themselves a little bit against life's sort of, unpredictabilities. I don't think the idea that they're somehow sort of, bad people is just. It's not
that. It's an interesting place to set a boundary. To say these are the people who we're going to leave alone, and these are the people we're going to tax more heavily, and in general will disadvantage more. And then this school thing. Why do people send their children to independent schools? Because they don't think the state schools are good enough. And they think that one of the best things they can do for their children is get them a proper education. What kind of government penalises that?
I completely agree. And also I think a lot of people send their children to private school because they find state schools scary, which they are.
Well, it's not just that. Some public schools are quite scary. I speak with knowledge, but I don't think that's a lot of the schools which are now being set up. There are quite a large number of independent schools which are far more modest and not at all snob factories of any kind, and these will be quite hard hit by this as well.
Yeah.
People don't realise that an awful lot of people are facing particularly problems with children who really don't want to go to school because it's so frightening, and if they don't send them somewhere else, they won't go.
No.
And at the same time, the government's going on about setting up registers of who's going to school and who's not. They should instead.
They said they're going to crack down on truancy.
Instead, they should be worrying about why children don't go to school.
Yeah. And about what happens to them when they do go to school, and the gangs they get into, and the drugs they get pulled into, and all of the things that they don't have that nobody seems to be prepared to tackle at all.
Well, it's a great dogmatic issue on the British left, and has been since the 1960s, and the abolition of selection by ability and the creation of comprehensive schools never had a single education argument in its favour. There was no evidence at all the schools would be better, and quite a lot that they would be worse. But they went ahead with it because it's basically a political egalitarian project, and they will not admit that it's gone wrong, because that's in the nature of the left. They do all kinds of things sometimes for quite good motives. They go wrong, they won't admit it.
Talking of ideologically driven decisions, they're going to renationalise the railways.
Well, sort of, bit by bit. I mean, it's at least they're not going to keep trying to reprivatise the parts of the railways which are handed back to them by franchisees who don't fancy it anymore. But a proper renationalisation of the railways, an actual recognition, as, say, France has, or the Netherlands have, that the railways are a huge national resource, vital for the environment. For if you're seriously concerned, by the way, about reducing pollution as well, railways are a vital resource. But also they're an immensely civilising influence on any country which has them, and you'll notice that an awful lot of countries, as they sink into the third world, get rid of them.
Yeah.
Government has to take responsibility. They're not going to make a profit. No. Their benefits are largely social and in terms of cleanliness and peace and quiet and good town planning and things like that. And they have to take full responsibility for it. This is a bit half-hearted for me. I don't think it's a proper renationalisation, a proper recognition that it's a national resource which has to be backed to the hilt by government.
Also, we have several national resources. Well, one particular national resource, which is the NHS, that we can't afford. So why are we having more?
Well, we can afford an NHS. We can afford all kinds of things in this country if we design them better and have more intelligent goals for them. The NHS, as we have it, was set up by Nye Bevan, 75 years ago, for another purpose. The country was then full of people exhausted, in many cases injured by years and years of hard manual work, who had nowhere to turn, couldn't afford proper medical treatment, and the NHS was set up to deal with that. We don't have that problem anymore. Totally different problems, but the NHS still functions as a national curing service to try and put people right who've been damaged, rather than cooperating with people in helping them maintain their own health.
And prevention.
And prevention is so vital, and it would be enormously beneficial if it became much more of a preventive service. But that's the way it needs to be tackled, not trying to maintain it as it used to be, because it simply doesn't need to do what it did when it was set up. It has a different aim.
Completely different aim. And what about the stuff that they're doing on housing? So landlords, they're going to... Well, I mean, this was something that the Tories did try to do, which was to have this sort of renters' charter, but that got blocked by the right of the party.
Well, those of us who've had to try and arrange rentals for our children away at university or wherever it is know that actually landlords have a great deal of power.
Well, I mean, I rent myself.
Power at the moment.
And, one is completely enthralled to one's landlord.
The agreements that you have to sign are very, very tough and very binding. I'm not sure landlords are really... I don't think they need any more power, so I'm not particularly sceptical if the government now says actually it's going to take a little bit of it away from them. But there is a danger here. Those of us old enough to remember the old Rent Acts, if you restrict private landlords too much, you do kill the private rental market. But if you really wanted to solve the housing problems of this country, what you would do would be to return to the proper council housing, which was, in my view, very foolishly broken up by Margaret Thatcher, because it's a far better way of arranging housing for social housing and also for making it possible for people to move for work, and actually also far cheaper than the disaster of housing benefit, which I think at the last count cost more each year than the Royal Air Force.
Well, exactly, because of course you have to pay commercial rents.
It doesn't work. It's not. It hasn't. It doesn't. There are a lot of people who really struggle to find houses, who oughtn't to struggle, and I think that there's a kind of unanimous consensus that the sale of council houses was a good thing. I don't agree for two reasons. It got rid of an awful lot of very available social housing. It also broke up quite a lot of stable communities in which people lived peacefully and relatively crime-free, and they don't anymore. The other thing, it released huge amounts of money to the housing market and began the housing inflation with which we now have to live.
So, I mean, that is the main problem, is the housing inflation. That is the root cause of all of these issues, isn't it?
Well, it has. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, people like me, and I'm of course well off. I don't think I could afford my own house now.
No.
And it's absurd that house prices have come to this level, but it's a reflection of the true level of inflation in our society, which we don't acknowledge. Inflation is hugely undermeasured by official statistics.
Trump.
These things are appalling, and of course one person did die, and I think another was quite badly injured. Yeah. And when people go berserk with firearms, then these terrible things happen.
Yeah.
But to talk about politically, it would certainly appear to have enhanced his position.
Well, I'm astonished that he was put in that position in the first place. he was very lucky, because if he'd moved his head slightly the other
I
way...
won't have that. He would have been luckier if nobody had taken a shot at
Oh,
him.
well, yes, that's true. But given that
It's
they
never
did...
lucky. No, I'm the luckiest man alive, people say when they step out of some hideous car crash. No, you would have been luckier if you
Yes,
had
but we
never
all
been
know that
in
I'm a
that.
glass half full person and you're a glass
But
half empty.
we also all know there is no such thing as a glass half full unless someone's actually filling it. All glasses are half empty unless they're being filled.
Well, there you go.
This is a fundamental rule of pessimism. And until you understand, this is why pessimists are necessary, because nobody else will ever buy the next round, because they will not observe all the glasses are half empty.
But it was an astonishing moment, and that picture of him raising his fist with the blood on his face,
Yes,
that's quite iconic. I am...
Brilliant piece of photojournalism,
Yes.
I have to say. The thing which people often underestimate, how incredibly difficult it is to capture images of that power, and how seldom it really happens.
But I do think that... to be honest, I thought he was going to win the election before this, because I think Biden is such an embarrassment. And
it's funny, isn't it? And then you see that the night before the assassination attempt, when Joe Biden was in Detroit, and it was that extraordinary rally, and the people were shouting from the stands, "Don't you quit!" And outside Washington D.C., Sarah Smith, who's I think one of the good radio broadcasters in America, pointing out in Washington D.C. it's nothing except why doesn't Biden go? But you get outside Washington D.C. in the Beltway and you find among Democrats there's quite a strong loyalty.
why
to
do you
him.
think that is? Can they not see that he
Because
can't?
America outside Washington D.C. is very different. It's much more idealistic, straightforward-minded place than Washington D.C. is.
But they can't.
People are different outside. That's all. They have stronger loyalties and are less likely to be diverted.
But you can't have somebody who doesn't know the difference
You would
between
say that.
Zelensky and Putin.
You would say that.
You
and
just
I
can't.
would agree with you. If we lived in the USA,
Yeah.
we would be inside the Beltway people.
Yeah, I suppose so. Do you think Trump will be an improvement?
No, I can't stand either of them.
Mm.
I think it's tragic and desperate for a country of which I'm rather fond that this should be what it faces.
Mm.
But the problem is partly that the huge mistake which the Democrats made in running Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump was finding the only person in the entire 50 states who Trump could beat and running her against him.
There was that wonderful moment
And
where
then blaming it on the Russians.
And then she talked about when she talked about deplorables. Do you remember
She did,
that?
but it was too late by then.
Awful.
Hillary's never going to... Hillary, when she was the governor's wife in Arkansas, she had to go to an event. The Arkansas state football team is called the Razorbacks, named after an extinct pig. And the ceremony at the matches involves, and of course Bill Clinton would join in this, it involves all the fans putting on big red plastic hats in the shape of a razorback pig and shouting, "Sue-ee, pig, we bad." And everybody had to join in this, except Hillary, who would go to the matches and sit there reading a sociology book in front row. She hasn't got the touch.
No, she really hasn't.
She simply has not got the touch.
I mean, I don't blame her on that
work.
particular count. But
No, I don't blame her either. I mean, I would have done the same. But then again, I don't have the democratic touch either, do I?
I don't know. Well, we'll see. I think
I've
he'll
never
win.
even been elected to a committee in a Trotskyist organisation, let alone President of the United States.
What about J.D. Vance calling Britain an Islamic country?
Well...
Islamist country, I should say.
I think there is a considerable ignorance about Britain in the United States, matched, I have to say, by the ignorance of British
Do you think he's been
people
talking to
in the
Nigel Farage too much?
Who knows? But he's said a number of things, hasn't he? Didn't he also say that that Donald Trump was America's Hitler?
Did he?
I believe so, some time ago.
Did he mean that in a good sense or a bad sense?
I think he meant it in a bad sense, but I
Right.
think he's now had to. They were all there, like defendants in a show trial, weren't they?
Okay.
At the convention, all lined up, saying the man who they fought with all their might to stop getting the nomination is actually the greatest man who ever lived.
I don't
It's
know.
pitiful.
It is pitiful.
But I think the real thing about Donald Trump, the real absolute nightmare about Donald Trump, is he is, in my view, a creation of the left. He is what they imagined a conservative to be. And by stamping on every other attempt to rein in their cultural, moral and social revolution for the past 50 years, they have created this monster who is actually exactly what they've always feared.
Well,
But I
also-
fear him as well. I take no comfort at all from Donald Trump. There's nothing about him which makes me think anything will get better if he were back in the White House.
No, I mean, but he is what you get. I mean, he's what you get when you annoy people by being far too annoyingly left-wing and
Yes, I
woke.
think
That's what you end up
I think
with.
that's what he is.
Maybe that's what Vance meant when he said he was Hitler. Because of
No,
course,
I don't think it is what he meant.
Do you not?
No, I don't.
He wasn't making a comparison with Germany in the 1930s.
I don't believe so. No, I think he was just being straightforward.
He was just being
downright rude. Yes. When he thought it didn't matter, but then somebody wrote it down, and there it now is.
Yeah. Well.
So, Mr. Vice President, do you still think?
I didn't mean that Hitler was a different Hitler that no one's ever met. It was a nice Hitler.
Yeah.
It was a nice Hitler man I've met before. Okay, so this week there's been a whole resurgence of the Lucy Letby case. Now, you're fascinating on this. Tell me your views.
Well, it's not this week, you know. I know.
I mean, it's been going.
I mean, I actually raised the question back in September.
I know. I remember having a conversation with you about it.
It just looked wrong to me, and the more I looked at it, the more wrong I thought. But fascinatingly, in the long period of silence imposed by the second trial, the New Yorker, Rachel Aviv, produced this astonishing article. Have you read it?
No.
Oh, I must. It is quite easily obtainable now. I must urge you to read it, because if you had doubts before, you will have much greater ones later. If you haven't got any doubts, I think it will.
No, I've always had doubts because I've always felt the evidence was all quite circumstantial.
Totally circumstantial. That's the problem with it, and full of suppositions about what might have happened, and also statistical claims which actual statisticians, including the Royal Society of Statisticians, have pointed out are extremely dubious and probably wrong. I think the case for the Criminal Cases Review Commission taking it up and asking the appeal court to reopen it, because the appeal court have already refused to leave to appeal, I thought with amazing speed, and having read their judgment, I just thought, I'm not quite sure what it is that makes them so keen to prevent an appeal, or why it would be a good idea when the case is so controversial. Why not have an appeal?
Well,
what can possibly
well,
be
because
the argument
presumably,
against it?
Well, maybe they have concerns that the case is not sound and they don't want to be proven.
Well, that would be a terrible reason. I think judges are better than that. Honestly, I think But on the other hand, judges are trained to be very, very wedded to procedure, and quite right too. Procedure is important, but I think there are times when humanity overcomes procedure. If you were in prison and you'd been sent there for the rest of your life, and you're sitting there and your lawyers came into you and they said, "Look, I'm really sorry, Sarah, but we've got this fantastic new evidence which would show you to be completely innocent of the crime for which you've been locked up here. But the judges won't let us introduce it because we didn't introduce it during the first trial." You'd say, "Hang on a minute.
That's not
am I here because I'm guilty, or am I here because procedure
because it's
has to be
inconvenient to the justice system to go through again?" Well, I mean, I think so. For you, what are the main questions in the Letby case?
Well, the main questions are, first of all, that the nature of the deaths which are alleged to be murders, and this is very hard, and people will say to me, "Well, how can you talk about this? There are grieving parents," and I will say, I'm desperately sorry for the parents involved who lost babies. Anybody who's held a baby in their own arms has to feel desperately sorry. I wouldn't rather enormously not even to be bringing up the subject, but there is here the case of somebody who may have been locked up unjustly, and I can't spend a day without that nagging at my conscience, the thought that there might be somebody in prison unjustly who I might be able to help. I have to do it. So that's why I speak. It is possible that these babies who were not particularly healthy by their nature, they wouldn't have been in the unit otherwise, who were in many cases hugely premature, it is possible that their deaths are not the result of murder. And from that then flows an awful lot of other stuff about whether the means which are supposed to have been employed to murder them, which are fundamentally hypothetical, actually were used. And then there is the statistical pattern of her shifts, which has been used to suggest that because she was there on all the occasions when babies died, she's responsible. This is highly suspect because there were other deaths which are not included in the chart, just for example. And one statistician has said that all the chart proves is that Lucy Letby was on duty when she was on duty.
Yeah, but she had.
So these are very, very important doubts to be cast. I don't say, I'm in no position to say Lucy Letby is not guilty. I wasn't at the trial, as people will doubtless remind me. I'm not an expert, as I'm only too happy to admit. What I notice, both in the New Yorker article and in the very powerful dissections of the case in the Guardian and the Telegraph last week, involving interviewing quite a lot of people who are knowledgeable about the subject, there is a lot of professional doubt among people who know about this sort of thing. And I think that we have to pay attention to it. And if justice is to be done in this country, then if there is serious doubt about it, then it has to be re-examined.
But also, it has to be beyond reasonable doubt, and
Well, that's what the jury thought it was. The jury was.
But do you think the fact that it's to do with babies, premature, tiny little defenseless babies, and how is it possible for a jury to be dispassionate about a subject like that?
I shouldn't think so. So I don't think I would have been if I'd been on the jury, try as I might.
Yeah.
And the idea that stalking through the wards of a hospital, supposedly there to save children from death and disease, was a woman dedicated to killing them is so horrifying that if it's put before you, then you must want to have such a person caught and punished. I don't criticise the jury. I'm not involved. I'm absolutely not interested in criticising the jury or the judge or the witnesses. I think everybody involved in that trial was involved in good faith. But I think even so, I think it may have produced a perverse result.
Well, do you think she'll get her retrial?
I don't know. It's very, very hard. If you look at the case of Andrew Malkinson, the man who did 17 years for rape he didn't do, how long it took for the British legal system, then going back even further, the case of the Birmingham Six, for instance, the Guildford Four, how long it took. And then at other cases, which was not a trial, but an admission of reality over the Bloody Sunday killings, how long it took the British legal system to admit that mistakes had been made. I think we have to, quite possibly, it's terribly sad because during all this time somebody quite possibly sits in prison unjustly. We have to accept it could be a long battle. I hope it isn't. It would be nice to see this sort of thing done swiftly, but it may be quite a while before we can persuade. Lucy Letby herself has to ask the Criminal Cases Review Commission to reopen the case. I don't know whether she's decided to do so or not. I have no knowledge of what her thought process is.
She, who knows, frankly.
She obviously will take advice on, and again, timing could be very important.
If she is innocent, she must be in the most unbelievable situation, and if she's not, but I can't imagine how it would be to be accused of a crime like that if you hadn't done it.
It's a year now since I did my little experiment of living in a fake prison with a load of former prisoners. And I thought I knew quite a bit about what prisoners were like.
This was the show. This was the TV show.
Yes, it's called Bagged Up, Channel 4.
You can still watch it on...
You can.
Yeah.
And it was just, actually, I did 4 days, but I had agreed not to leave. So I was there and in the company of people who had been in prison and who'd been obviously asked by the producers to replicate as far as possible what it would have been like. And it was pretty hard going. And it made it easier to imagine that thing which you were just mentioning, what it might be like to be innocent in a place such as that.
Strictly is in trouble. The BBC is in trouble.
Yes.
Tell us all about it.
So on Saturday, we revealed that Graziano Di Prima, who is an Italian professional dancer, was sacked by the BBC for gross misconduct. It later emerged that he had hit and kicked his partner from last year, Zara McDermott. She, for anybody who doesn't quite know who she is, she was a Love Island contestant and now makes documentaries, mostly about kind of, proper real issues like, how women are treated. And so it turns out that the production team working on Strictly had, during the series last year, gone to the bosses and said, the way Graziano's treating Zara is unacceptable. He was warned twice about his behaviour, but was still allowed to keep dancing, as they say, as the late Bruce Forsyth said. And the production team were very unsatisfied about this response that they got. And so during the investigation into Giovanni Panici, the one that's still ongoing...
another Italian.
Another Sicilian, actually, who has been accused by his former dance partner, Amanda Abington, of bullying her during rehearsals. the production team went back to their bosses while this investigation was ongoing and said, look, here's a video. Have a look at this video. He's kicking her. He's hitting her.
What, I mean, he's kicking her, what, she's on the ground and he's kicking her, or he's just kicking her?
He's kicking her.
I mean, because obviously, you know, I've danced with a few people and I've kicked them, not intentionally.
No, it was intentional.
Okay.
He was sacked for gross misconduct.
Yeah,
it wasn't a, oh gosh,
there's no dispute about this.
No, there's no dispute about this.
He doesn't deny it.
No, he doesn't deny it. He came out on his Instagram on Saturday afternoon, you know, apologising for his behaviour. He's hired himself a crisis publicist, as these people often do, who explained that his crime is his Sicilian passion.
Right. Okay.
So yesterday,
I'm not sure that publicist is worth.
It's not really.
No,
it's not. It doesn't really wash, does it?
Better off without that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I understand that dancers are very dedicated individuals physically. You know, what they do is very difficult, and they're probably quite passionate about it and very used to subjecting themselves to quite sort of rigorous routines. And I can understand that if you were dealing with the sort of slightly, you know, like if you were dealing with someone like me, a middle-aged, overweight not celebrity, but a middle-aged, overweight lady who maybe wanted to do a little bit of dancing.
You are a celebrity,
but then would probably want to have a little sit down and a cake.
Yes.
That it would be frustrating. But I don't think it's okay. I mean, it's a game show. It's not life or death, is it?
I think this is the thing, though. You've got some people who go on there to win.
Yeah.
You look at some of them in the past. They have celebrities I'm talking about here. They really want to win, and you have others that want to take part. And we actually discussed this earlier, didn't we? There are some people that want to go on there and say, "Oh, lose a bit of weight, have a bit of fun, wear some glitzy dresses," which is fine. But then you have the issue they have with Giovanni Panici and Amanda Abington is a very good case in point, because Giovanni is a winner.
Yeah.
Like, he wants the best. He thinks his job is to get the best out of his partner.
Yes.
And he wants tip-top results.
But it's not SAS Who Dares Wins.
No, it's not.
It's Strictly Come Dancing.
Whereas
much tougher than
Amanda
that.
was I mean, Amanda was coming from a very different place and, you know, wanted to enjoy herself and wear a dress. So perhaps they paired them. You know, they should perhaps work on their pairings a little better. But, you know, people do want to go on there and
but
win.
the thing is, though, I think I don't know what do you watch it?
I know. I once watched it. It was an occasion when Ed Balls was lowered from the ceiling.
Oh, yes,
with his face covered in green paint, and I thought, this isn't really for me.
Please don't ring
but
me.
You see, I think in the beginning, when you talk about Ed Balls, and then there was Anne Widdecombe and John Sargent. Yeah. In the beginning, the joy of Strictly was that you took these incredible sort of dancers and athletes who were brilliant, and then the sort of judges who had all sorts of kind of weird rules about dancing, and then you took these complete novices, and basically it was just a bit of a laugh. It was them, you know, trying hard and failing to dance. Although I think Ed did quite well, didn't he? In the end,
I wouldn't know.
Ed did okay.
Yes.
He was never
his Gangnam style was very popular. I seem to remember. But the problem with it now is that a lot of the celebrities they have on are sort of almost kind of professional dancers, pretty much.
This. I mean, from the beginning, you had Natasha Kaplinsky, who was the first ever winner. She was fantastic.
Yes,
she was brilliant.
Yeah.
And she took it very seriously.
Yes. Well, she's a sort of all-round head girl, isn't she? She's going to be good at everything she does. That's the law.
He had Abby Clancy, who went on there. She was a wag.
Yeah.
Went on there and she worked so hard and she won.
Yeah.
But Katie,
and
how long was it between these events and this coming out?
So as we said, so it happened during the show. They were eliminated in week 6. So
this is the last series we're talking about.
Yes, the last series they were eliminated.
So we
in week
found
6.
out about it when?
On Saturday.
So quite a long time.
Yes. So
what strikes me about this slightly is the governance of the BBC.
Yes.
Well, exactly.
This is something I was hoping we could come on to. So he was sacked on the spot a few days before, like early last week. He was sacked on the spot, and we revealed it on Saturday. However, there were complaints made during the show, which, Zara is not particularly happy about, that he was allowed to get away with it. Now, you know, the BBC did say they warned him of his behaviour.
So they've just sat on it, basically.
They've sat on it. They claim that there was no physical abuse.
Well, no, but if he punched and kicked her.
But there was no physical abuse that was flagged to them during the series last year.
Okay.
So that's what they're saying. However, this is a man who they warned twice, and they still allowed him to keep dancing, and they allowed him to go on the tour, And then he was unveiled as being a dancer for the forthcoming series. So despite them knowing his pretty abhorrent behaviour, they were happy to have him back.
Do you think that the BBC are just so desperate to protect what little success they have that they didn't want to kind of flag it?
Well, I don't know. It's something about which I know absolutely nothing, but it does seem to suggest that they might not be terribly keen on making a public fuss about it.
No. Is the production company... It's not presumably
It's BBC Studios.
It's BBC
so
Studios.
BBC Studios is the commercial arm of the BBC.
Yeah, not licence fee finance.
Well, I mean,
it makes all its money itself.
Yeah.
Well, although it is funded by the BBC, by the taxpayer.
But they are sort of independent.
So that's they claim. They hide behind that, don't they?
Mm.
So we do. So yes, but I think Strictly is one of the most watched and longest running shows on the BBC.
20 years.
So
now.
they will be doing. But this is the thing. It's the 20th.
It's the 20th anniversary. Isn't it?
So this is just a nightmare for them because yesterday they announced that they were upping their duty of care, so there's now going to be a producer.
Well, I've heard there's going to be a chaperone, which I was saying earlier to Peter sounds rather Bridgerton to me.
Yes, I think chaperone is probably the wrong word to use.
That's what they've said.
I know. Well, what they actually said was they're going to have
an invigilator,
a producer in every rehearsal. So for example, last year.
See, I thought they would have had someone.
Well, no. See, I was quite surprised about this. So last year, I went to interview Christian and Guru Murphy and his daughter, his partner, Lauren Oakley. And I went to the library in Boreham Wood where they were rehearsing. And there was a publicist there to purely to listen into my interview, but nobody else. And once that publicist went and I went, they were on their own for hours. And
well, no wonder they all have affairs.
Well, that's the other thing.
I mean, you put someone in a room with a sort of Adonis.
We're not exactly talking about affairs here.
But they all do.
But this so now what we've come on to, which I wrote today, is that they're struggling to find female contestants.
Well, yeah.
Now they have actually been struggling for quite some time since the Strictly curse became a thing. So of course we've seen so many marriages and relationships ending.
Well, I'm divorced, and I could do with losing about 5 stone, so I could do it.
Well, Ali Ash has just come back and he's hot. so you already got.
Peter, what do you think?
Do you think I should do it?
Yes, I think maybe you should. You're very good at doing reality TV because you did the prison thing.
Well, yes, it's
Do you want
slightly
me to
different.
put a word
I
in?
never once had to dance.
Should we get Katie to put a word in? I think. Do you know what? I think Peter Hitchens on Strictly would be genius.
The one evening things got so out of hand that I did sing, which I wouldn't normally do anywhere near a microphone. But dance, no. I think the world's not ready for that. But I think you should go for it.
So we're now at the point where the BBC have introduced these producers in the rehearsals.
Yeah.
They're also going to ensure that their staff are spoken to about how they should and shouldn't behave. I think perhaps that was a bit of a masterstroke by the BBC yesterday, which they hope will, keep this show going. I think the problem they've got is the viewers aren't stupid. No. And I think they've now seen this, the sort of, this veneer has been shattered, hasn't it?
Well, the thing is, we all know that the world of ballroom dancing is a veneer. We all know that it's kind of really bitchy and horrible and difficult, and then there's this sort of everyone comes out and they've all got their showbiz smiles on and everything, and it's quite interesting that that's sort of being reflected in the Strictly Come Dancing story, because I've always suspected that stuff, I've always felt that kind of bitchy world was going to come to the fore somehow.
Well, Zara McDermott said in her statement yesterday, she posted on Instagram, she hadn't actually said a word until yesterday morning, and she said, everything about Strictly was wonderful and a childhood dream, but the training was something she found a very difficult experience. And I think you hear a publicist who I know who has had several of his clients have done Strictly. So one of them, she wouldn't have any toenails left by the end of the week. They're dancing in these lovely shoes and these lovely dresses without any toenails. They're bruised. They're covered. They're black and blue. It's hot. It's very hot.
Should be sponsored by ibuprofen.
Maybe it's a program whose time has gone.
I wonder. I do wonder about that.
Maybe you should go back to Sunday night at the London
Palladium. Yes.
I think
you can't
as well.
remember that.
Actually, I do remember that.
No.
I think as well the whole reality television thing is coming to an end, isn't it? You look at how they used to how Simon Cowell used to speak to these wannabes on the X Factor, who was pretty nasty. There was nasty Nigel Lithgow, and I think that stuff can't continue.
No.
It doesn't happen anymore.
No, we have listeners, which is amazing, and they send in questions, which is even more amazing.
Come on then.
Hiya, it's Margaret from Skegness. What will Labour do to the House of Lords, and does it need reform?
Peter.
They will take out the hereditary peers, and what they should be doing is putting them all back, the ones they chucked out in the 1990s, because hereditary peers have one great thing about them. They don't owe anybody anything.
Yeah.
They can do what they like. They can put two fingers up to the government and refuse to do what it tells them to. Nobody else in Parliament can do that, particularly members of Parliament who are actually effectively employees of the government. They will not get elected again if they annoy their party, because their party will arrange for them to be deselected. They're completely and utterly under the thumb of Downing Street, whereas hereditary peers are not. And it's amazing that people say, oh, well, the Commons are democratically elected, so they must be good. And hereditary peers were appointed by Charles II, well, or rather their great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers were, so they must be bad. There's no logic to this. If you think about it, you'd be much better off with more hereditaries and fewer elected people.
Well, yes, because, of course, the House of Lords is basically a sort of prize for sort of toadies, isn't it?
It is now, but there was a time when it was still predominantly hereditary, and there were an awful lot of hereditaries in it, and they were, as I say, independent. I remember when I used to work down the Houses of Parliament, going along each week to see Willie Whitelaw when he was the government's head honcho in the House of Lords and his chief whip. And they would say, look, there's no point in us trying to whip even the Conservative peers into doing what we want them to do. We have absolutely no power over them at all. We can persuade them, but we cannot make them, and that's why we lose votes. And I thought that was marvellous. I still do. Because that's not true in the Commons. But also, always blackmail people.
If the principle of the second chamber is that it's independent, then
it's a great loss. And when they do the next thing they're going to do, which they plan to do, is to create this new chamber of the nations and regions, which will be elected by some system or other, which is what's next. Then people will look back on the days of the House of Lords with sorrow and regret and wish we still had it.
Halcyon days. Next question.
The plan is to end no-fault evictions, but where does that leave the thousands of middle-class landlords who can't afford to not pick up rent?
I don't know that no-fault evictions are to do with not paying rent, are they?
I don't think they can be, can they?
No, they're not.
I would have thought not paying rent was quite a severe fault.
Yeah.
In almost all
I think no-fault evictions...
rental agreements, not paying rent would get you chucked out anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no-fault is when you just sort of decide as a landlord that you can probably get more for your apartment or house, and you get rid of the tenant in order to do that.
As far as I know,
yeah.
Unless somebody knows better, I don't think that anyone can really look at the idea of getting rid of no-fault evictions and say this is a terrible action of oppression and brutal socialism, because I don't think it is.
No, I agree. Sorry. Next question.
Hi, Sarah and Peter. It's Josh from Richmond. Is Great British Energy a good idea?
I can't answer that question because I don't understand what it is.
Nor do I. And I've tried to find out, but it doesn't. It's when I do sort of grapple with it, it immediately slides out of my head again. But what it is basically about is net zero, and about the pursuit of trying to get rid of any remaining carbon in our energy system, which is disastrous because we depend so completely on it. We could not function as a country without the huge number of gas-powered power stations.
But I thought it was going to be like an energy company that I could use as a consumer. That's not what it is.
I don't think it is, but it just seems to me to be a cover for an agency which will be generally trying to get us onto zero carbon.
Right.
And that will be both very expensive and very inefficient. It will bring about power cuts as far as I can see. And for what reason? The amount of carbon which this country produces...
minuscule.
It's compared with China, which builds about 3
yeah.
coal-fired power stations every month. It really doesn't matter very
I think
much.
It's
a dogmatic...
isn't our global contribution to CO2 emissions less than 1%?
I don't know.
I think
what I do know is that is whatever it is, and you set what we're doing beside what China and India are doing, and both of them have very large coal resources and use them. It just makes a nonsense of it. It's a purely symbolic gesture, which is expensive for this country. It also means that we're at more risk of power cuts.
And who's in charge of this symbolic gesture?
When you say who is in charge.
Is there somebody who's...
Ed Miliband,
as
far as one knows.
Well,
which is reassuring.
My point.
Which is reassuring.
Very reassuring. Not very reassuring. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Peter.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. I don't know when Andrew's back. He's on a holiday somewhere. I'm away next week.
Yeah,
So maybe you'll be doing the whole thing,
Who
Peter.
knows what we do? Talk to myself for an
You could talk to yourself, yeah. Or you and Katie could do a special celebrity Strictly Come Dancing
talk
session.
about dancing the
You
whole
could tell me all
time.
about your time in prison.
Yep, any time.
Well, thank you very much for listening or watching The Reaction. We're not going to be here next week because I'm away and so is Andrew, so we're going to take a week off, but we'll be back the week after. I hope you'll join us then.